road from here.
Yeah, sure.
Christopher was Dr. Hopkins to me for the first 30 years of my life. I hope I can call you Christopher today.
I hope so.
And Christopher has known my family ever since we've been here, and actually lived with my sister at home, done 50 years ago. So today, Christopher, we're going to hear about your life, and then towards the end we're going to have a little debate about the state of modern general practice, with your views, Christopher, dating back to the halcyon days of the 50s, 60s and 70s. With Tim Morton here, the GP who runs practice at Beccles, who will be representing the 2020 view of general practice. So Christopher, you were born in 1927, at a time when we still had an empire, when the memories of the First World War were still very much alive. And I thought it would be really interesting if we started maybe with you talking a little bit about your parents and your early childhood in England. Christopher.
Thank you, David. Hope you can hear me. I think my microphone's working, so I did have to start. I'm going to sit down with it. I'm in a man here. But, I was thinking of your father last night, actually, David. And I remember what he said when he spoke to Edward Heath when he started being Prime Minister. I wasn't getting on very well with his speeches. So your father told me this. He gave him a bit of advice. He said, before you make a speech, have a glass of champagne. Hope I needed one, so I didn't open the bottle today. Maybe after. So, I want to talk about my parents. Well, I'm going to start by putting the picture on. I hope you've got, yes, there we go. Well, that's my father. Because, of course, I come from, I was my mother, of course. But I'm very proud of my father. And there he is in his Royal Engineers uniform. He was an officer. And he was in the World War I and also actually in the army in the Second World War. Now, you can see that badge on his arm, which actually is insignia for his officer status. And I understood, and I know it was a bit of controversy, it was put there so that he would, if on your lapel, you wouldn't be spotted by snipers. So. But anyway, he told me he landed in France. It was August 1918, and as he landed, so the Germans retreated. And anyway, he was in the trenches with mortars, setting off gas shells, which he was at Ypres, and he was the same area where Hitler was. And Hitler was gassed, of course. So my father said, well, if only he'd done his job a little bit better, then he'd stop World War II. So anyway, he married my mother, and let's get in the next one.
Can everyone hear at the back? All right.
Yeah.
Can you hear? Is it coming through?
Okay.
Loudspeaker? It counts for the forces of the whole of the Middle East, and things were so different at that time. He told me that he had to go around once a year to inspect all these different forces. So, in Cairo, there was one battalion of troops, there was 2 squadrons of Air Force in the desert, another battalion in Jerusalem, 2 squadrons of Air Force in the desert in Iraq. Well, how different it is since now. So he told me what they did to keep the peace in Iraq in those days. These aeroplanes, if there was a bit of trouble somewhere, they dropped the leaflets one day, and of course a bit of trouble. If you don't behave yourself, they drop a bomb on you tomorrow. These biplanes probably dropped a bomb over the side of Minster. So things were so different. I say that was a wonderful time to feel proud. I know there's a lot of controversy about the British Empire, but I remember seeing that red all over the map and feeling so proud. And there was, well, we're in Prax Britannia. And what's happened since, the Middle East and many parts of the world.
So Christopher, we wouldn't, I think, describe you as a woke person. As a small boy, you went to Egypt. You lived in Egypt for 4 years. So
Yes.
what was it like in Egypt?
Well, it was a lovely, ideally place for a young boy to live. We brought up, I was between 4 and 8, so we were on the Gezira Island, and there was a Gezira Sporting Club, which was marvellous, because the British, wherever they went around the world, put up sport sporting facilities, and there we were in the middle of Cairo, only for Europeans, and we had this club which was surrounded by fences and a person at the gate, and there was polo grounds, cricket grounds, there was a playground for our children, a swimming pool, a race course surrounding a golf course, so we had everything. So there we went with our nannies and had the freedom of going all the way around, and that's where I learned my first impressions.
Were you conscious at all of the difference between the local people who were not allowed into the compound where you were and the privilege that Europeans felt? Were you conscious of that difference at all?
I don't know if I was a small boy, but we had servants, of course, who were Egyptians, or one was Sudanese. No, I suppose we lived in our own world as a small boy, you certainly did. So there were French, there were Italians, and I went to a French school then, and that's how I think I started to learn a bit of French. Anyway, no, I had a great time then, and that's where I was able to boast as the age of 6 swimming the Suez Canal, which means I swam from Africa to Asia. And at 8, just before we left, I climbed to the top of the pyramid, the Great Pyramid. You saw the fines the other day on the television. They went inside. They're not allowed to go up now. So I had a great time. We had holidays. We went off to, I'm going to show you some pictures. We went into the desert, and there's me on a donkey with my sister and father and mother. And we used to go out and sleep out at night sometimes, which was on the brilliant stars, and it was a lovely occasion to be there. And here I am on the top. Oh, sorry, one more. I'm going again. Here we are. My great occasion. There I am. If I'm looking a bit cross, it was, if you can see my face, and dirty knees, I was pointed out by my son-in-law, because we had to scramble up. But I was so annoyed because that guide who was with us would insist me, a boy, had to hold his hand. That was my sister. Girls should have help, not boys. All I say is to people, don't worry about your sons if they don't do well. There's my particular son, who's in the lower remove, which is, they say that the people in the other 6 who get the scholarships to Oxford, they actually are given jobs by those in the lower remove, and the other ones who come with the nurse. I have to say, basically, I suppose, about my best son, Dr. James. Anyway, this is one little holiday we had before we left. We had a lovely holiday. It's a good time to be middle class, I have to say. I know that sounds a bit snobbish, but it was the difference between whether you're educated or not. You're called gentlemen, because you were respected. Because if you hadn't got a certain amount of money, you had to leave school at 14 then. Anyway, here we go on to come to number 4. As I say, sport was the great thing. As I'm in the cricket team, I'm that handsome fellow on the right, the front row. Anyway, there's myself playing rugger, and that's my friend Michael Harding, throwing the ball to me, and he actually played for England's stand off. And there's one great moment when I beat the Newcastle Grammar School in the final round, which won the actual event, and I got my colours and I was a big hero and all that. So that was my school days, really.
When you were at Angleford, the Second World War had broken out and was in full. It was at its height, really. So did the Second World War affect you at all, or not?
Well, not really at school. We always worried about playing games with friends and all the rest of it. So it bypassed me in many ways, but in fact, we were there. Up in Yorkshire, I wouldn't see much anything happening, except there was one dogfight where they maybe practice one for a while now, we thought it was anyway, over the school on one occasion. But we were evacuated, my father was evacuated to Warwick. The end of the war, we got into there, was with the bombers in the night. We had the bombers going to bomb Coventry, and one poor family in the height of it came in their cars and outside the gates of the farm I was on, absolutely terrified, poor things. But when we came to London, actually, when things seemed to be hotting up, we were there in September 1940, when Battle of Britain first came to London on that very first day. They started in the afternoon. We went into our shelter under the kitchen floor, and then when the all clear came, we came out, and there you could see the smoke coming up from the docks. They had another alarm in the night, and they came back again. That's when it all started, really, in London. So anyway, we went to the country for in all my holidays. We came back with a V1 and V2. My father brought back to London, and so we had the V1s and the V2s. But I found them rather exciting, actually. The V1s in particular, the buzz bombs we call them, because unless they're heading straight for you, we knew they were going to pass you by. So I remember when I was on Hampstead Heath, this one came zizzing by, it wasn't heading for me. Then at night we went under these Anderson shelters, which were made of steel iron, and we thought unless you had a direct hit, you'd be all right. And it was rather exciting when you heard in the night. And then there was a silence, we went, this is it. Just like a bungee jump or something. And then it was all over. And the V2s, well, they weren't that number. I was in northwest London, so it wasn't quite as bad as some other places. And when they came, it was all over. And so, apart from the rationing, particularly not having sweets, a few things like that, blackouts and all that sort of thing. But I suppose the worst aspect was I really felt we couldn't win the war. I didn't see how we possibly win the war when Germany occupied the whole of Europe, and Japanese got Singapore and all the rest of it. But we kept going with Churchill and a few other programs like it, amused, and he kept on more or less, General Churchill. It was also bad reports for America. All this work stuff again.
So when you came to the end of that war, the war had come to the end as well, you decided to go to medicine and went to the Middlesex to do your training. What was training to be a doctor like in those days?
I can tell you, PE Day, there we are. We did celebrate PE with a bonfire, and let the villagers in there have a little party in the grounds. And that's where we had a bonfire down by the pit. Sorry,
So after Aberforth you decided to train to be a doctor, and you went to Middlesex and spent 7 years, I think, training in Middlesex. What was that like at the time?
Well, I think I made the most of my time because I failed first MB twice. And so I had those lovely vacations, which I had a chance to really enjoy myself and have quite an adventurous time. So I made the most of it.
So do you think it was better to be in the lower remove than in the upper six?
Well, I have to say, they select doctors now simply on their A pluses and A's, and they don't necessarily make the best doctors. I wouldn't have got into a medical school now. I wouldn't have got my A pluses. I mean, I was still not completely with it, but I certainly, they don't select people on vacation, and there's a doctors, I say, who just want to do part-time. And I know you're having trouble, John, over getting part of them. You put it all in the papers recently. So, what was that?
Well, it took you 7 years to train.
Yeah, because I failed my exam. I got my final first time, but I did fail. I made the most of it. I can say I explored Europe, I explored the high seas, and had some, we're getting into that later on the other side of things.
Then you met your wife, Mary, at the end of this time, I think.
Yes. Well, I was casualty officer at the Middlesex, my third job, and I was just finishing the day when in came Mary with her mother. Mary's mother said she'd got a chicken bone in her throat. Now, I only thought about it recently, maybe it was a put-up job. Because she didn't like the fellow that my dear wife had been going out with. He had gone off to Germany. So I had the chance of stepping in. I didn't know about this story, but anyway, she didn't. I was perhaps lesser of two evils or whatever. But anyway, she had thought she got this chicken bone in her throat, so she came not to consult me, but she was going to see a consultant who deal with throats and so on. So she thought this chance of knowing I was in casualty, she had a daughter one. So then when she came in and had a sort of philosophy and so on, and Mary came to visit her, came and said, saw me. I went to see her mother, and I said, come on, let's have a drink at the one town, the students' pub next door. And we never looked back. We were married in 3 months. And I'm not made sure I got married to her before I went off into the army. And so,
you went off, I think, for 2 years in the army in Germany for 2 years, is that right?
Yes, for 2 years doing my national service, which was really, I was in hospitals. I'd done enough medical work beforehand to be made a junior specialist, as I said. And for the last 9 months or more, I was in charge of a hospital in Hamburg, BLH Hamburg, which I was the only medical man there. And so I was in charge of anyone who came to hospital anywhere in the north of Germany. So it was a very good experience. And I got to know the local Germans in their hospital, and that's how I first used hypoglycemics for diabetics, because they just discovered them, and they let me have some tablets. So I just happened to have a sergeant who was type 2 diabetic, and I showed his blood sugar go right down. So I boasted I was the first British person to use it in hospital.
But after spending time in Germany, you came back to England, and during that time, of course, the National Health Service had come into being, and you decided you wanted to go to general practice, and you came to Southwold. How did you end up in Southwold?
Well, it's not so easy to get into general practice in those days. I did an obstetric job for 6 months so I could get into a country practice that I was hoping for, and I applied for several, and I'm so pleased I didn't get into them, because one I applied for was now the London airport, another one is where the Dartford Tunnel is. And so, because we went along with about 100 other people. I mean, you can't get people now. And I was competing against 100. Anyway, just so happened that Southwold came up for the last night when I was doing my obstetrics. It just somehow, I think like always comes to come my way in life, and it just came at that very moment, because some poor fellow was having a brain tumour and needed to be replaced, so it's always one man's misfortune with one man's fortune. And I just somehow got clicked with the senior partner, and I managed to find him on the phone, and he invited me down, and that's how I had my first interview with his lovely children in the drawing room while he was doing his surgery and his wife was cooking the supper. And that's, as I said, was my first interview, and how I managed to beat 30 others to come to Southwold. Well, only after I'd been there about 4 or 5 years, so I put my boots up, as I thought, before I left there, and then suddenly this club was formed, and I joined it. So I don't know quite what we got on this. Oh, this is some time in my student days when I was sailing. That's me at the helm of some of the thing we took along the south coast. And there's when I arrived at Santander. That was the big race. First time I went offshore, really. And we had a big storm, all like the fast net race. A lot of people had to retire, but no one was actually drowned or died. But we were the last to get there, because we were a bit of a slow car. We really needed a storm to get us there. And that we were the last to get there, and we were in the news because everyone had arrived, and they thought we'd done the wrong the baby biscuit, and my poor parents saw a black placard outside one of the museums saying, Northern Lights still missing. Anyway, we got there and had 6 parties. We can see I think I've enjoyed myself. I think I couldn't put a bit pie-eyed, I think. But there's a lovely senorita who then, when I went back the next year in our Rolls Royce, we passed through Santander, we met up with her again, but she wouldn't come out because I didn't think we had any chaperones. So that's just going through the Kiel Canal on Overall, which is a Royal Engineers boat. It's a bit of route from the First World War, Second World War, and we came to Kiel to the yacht club, and it had been owned by the yacht club, and the same harbour master was there. He thought, gosh, it's so shabby now, compared with under the Luftwaffe farm. Anyway, they were under the local sort of German economy, had it all painted up while they were there for a while. Oh, there's the under the Rolls Royce, getting out, which we bought for £39, and went round Europe with a wet party, including a chap called Albert Nolan, was a Nolan report. He was John's cousin, and all over the fourth films actually. And we got down to Lisbon, where we met up. We stayed at the seminary where we were put up. The only time we slept in beds, where they very kindly put us up for 3 nights halfway around our trip. Oh, that's one island that someone really stayed, which actually belonged to Dan O'Connell's, descendants of Dan O'Connell. Anyway, there's Mary. When we got married, in the front page of the Evening Standard, Bride in the Breeze, and looking lovely as she always did. And there we are, Southwood. That's our house right in the middle. The white, just to the left of the white building, which is 10 North Parade. That's where I had the surgery, and where we first lived when we first came to Southwood. So we had a great time.
Give us an idea of what it was, a typical day in the life of a GP in the 1950s and 1960s.
Well, so we started with a surgery, of course, I started off completely in that house there without any receptionists or nurses or anybody else to help you. We took all the calls that came in, and your wife, when you went out, had a lot of telephone. And so you just didn't know who was coming through the door, which was really difficult when you, like me, never remember people's names. I had one occasion when someone had dinner with them. I can't remember her name. So luckily Mary was in the house, and I had to make some excuse and ask her name. And who's that we went to dinner with? Oh, Mrs. Barner. Yes, whatever we call someone's name. Oh, well, I had one way of asking was, how do you spell the name? Yes. B-R-O. I thought that's really easy. But anyway, surgeries went on as long as people came, anyone could turn up. They didn't have to wait 2 weeks or anything else, they just came along. And then, of course, you had the visits. Well, I think one of the most stressful things was trying to get around in time for your evening surgery, which couldn't have it any earlier than 5:30. And I could turn up at our surgery not so long ago. I have nothing compared about local surgeries. If I had gone down doctoring, I would say anything against local ones. But anyway, so I turned up 5:30 to get some drugs or something. And how many people were on? Really? Oh, we finished it off. We have a last point to the 5:30. I said we used to start. Anyway, we could go on to the third. But it was getting round. I had branch surgeries, which I'll show you if you want that. There we go. That's our marvellous Mrs. Morris. She was on the little Blackheath in Wenneston. So by the senior doctor, go into the village and down the track on the left. I started going down this track, about 100 yards back there, I think, with sort of brambles and things on either side. I thought, it can't be done now. I turned back and said to someone, where's the survey? Yes, it's done well. So I went back, and there it is. That's the house she lived in, and that's the shed where I had a nice, where I saw patients. The examining couch was a double bed. That was the occasion and we had a bell which connected with the patients who were around the back of that house to wait for me. And I was so tired once, I thought I must just have a lie down. And I went on and next moment I was asleep. When I woke up, I don't know how long I'd been there. I thought, oh Lord, they'll ring the bell. The next person came in. I wonder what that doctor was up to. Anyway, there's the hospital where on Christmas Day, the little children of Francis and Tina were up as nurses, and that's the matron in the middle. So the hospital was another place I visited, which was marvellous. It was so wonderful having your own hospital where you could have patients who could come up for surgery or for ordinary illnesses you could deal with, and a small operating theatre where you could deal with minor injuries and minor ops. So that was a great asset. That was another occasion which was fun when we had a procession around the town, which we got. Francis and Tina were dressed up as nurses. You can see the Southwold Hospital outpatients X-ray department. So we had an X-ray machine, which was a great asset, which had to go after a while because they passed some tests or all that. Probably was really dangerous, really. And the major operating person, when she left, I used to use it myself. I used to X-ray for twins, and that was the worst thing we could probably do, I think. But life was different. It was so relaxed in those days. You didn't worry about litigation. Somehow life was hard, but satisfying and fulfilling. We felt we were well. I wasn't one of you chaps down, because I'm sure you're going to love this job. In much more clever ways than I did. But somehow you felt very proud of it. Profession, and I was independent. That was a great thing. And I'll argue this a little bit later on, perhaps. But it was an American. So I go on Americans, which I have some just got. But anyway, he said to me, "Oh, it's socialised medicine." I said, "You couldn't get far from the truth." I said, "We were paid, yes, but after that we were left completely on our own. We could prescribe what we liked. We could send patients wherever we like, and there was no fear when we went to patients that it was going to cost them anything, or they would think, oh, we're making an extra visit, get some more money. So we felt we were our own person and we could just get on with our jobs without any interference. And I'll get on with it a bit later what did happen.
There's one question on that, which is that where you had a very elderly patient who's nearing the end of their lives, did you feel sufficiently independent to help them on their way a bit towards the end of their lives?
Well, I'm going to get on to that sometime, but hypnotherapy, is that what you're doing?
No. Once hypnotherapy was euthanasia.
We don't believe in that. You want to get on to debating in Parliament?
We'll come to that. Maybe this is about assisted dying. I was trying to introduce. We'll come to that maybe a little bit later. So, towards the end of your career, having enjoyed that degree of independence as a GP, I think you felt that the environment was changing, was more controlled, more targets, more contracts that you had to comply with. Is that why you decided to stop being a GP?
I think we're going to get that on just a little bit later on. So they took it out of me without realizing that I was very happy with my job. Well, that's why I really like to get on to hypnotherapy. Because I didn't it then, but I learned it in my last 10 years, and that's when I actually was asked to see by a doctor from actually someone from one away, who had a GP who used to panic attacks when he went to visit people in emergencies. And she knew because she'd been with us as a trainee and I'm practicing hypnotherapy. So she said to me, I gave him one session of self-hypnosis and he was off fine. And he and his wife, who were both GPs, then sent me many patients with similar troubles for years afterwards. It showed must have had a good effect. So all I'm trying, if I don't get anything else across today, I would like to put a plug for hypnotherapy, which is ignored by all the profession. And I found it so helpful in my last 10 years. So much anxiety about it, whether on its own or with associated with cancer or asthma or any other complaint. And you could use it so quickly, so easily, and I could use it myself if I want to. So I don't know why it's not used. You have mindfulness, which is the same thing, but I think the trouble is hypnotherapy has a bad name because of its being on the stage. Mindfulness does the same sort of thing, but they're not trained like a good person. The trouble is, so many people go off and get a weekend course in hypnotherapy and set themselves up as hypnotherapists, which is probably given us a bad name, but don't really do a proper job. But if you're trained as a GP, looking after people, you know a certain amount of psychiatry, so you're the person who can really help people, and it's not used. I know I got off the point, but I had to say that.
Apart from hypnotherapy, if you think of the extraordinary changes in orthopedics, oncology, major organ transplantation, those kinds of, what would you say was the biggest breakthrough in medical practice that happened during your time?
I suppose dialysis. The people who have died of renal failure, I had one person who in fact had to go all the way up to London in those days because they didn't go anywhere in East Anglia, and he went up once a week to be diagnosed. He was only quite a young man in his 30s, and so he survived many years that way, and in the end they actually set up, he lived in a council house in Courtney Road, where they had to, with a crane, lift this over the top because the house in a big road, and put this shed in the garden where he could go and have his dialysis every night. So I would say that was the one biggest thing. When I first qualified, they were just starting to do heart surgeries, heart surgery in the Middlesex. So that was another big breakthrough. Renal transplants, that's another thing. Whenever these things happened, or like AIDS, I went down to London to sort of go to St James's for AIDS, I think it was. Or St James's was a nephrology, see what was going on. So, I'm trying to get in on it as it was starting.
Before we move on then to a more just a debate about general practice, is there anything else in your career that we've missed out? Maybe the sabbatical that you took, is something you'd like?
Well, I'll just give you one picture of myself. Being a doctor in this town of Paget, sort of or agent through the town. That's another one. This I call a sort of symbolizes country practice. Now, there's the bride. There's our little girls, plus a team of bridesmaids, and James getting in on the scene, although he had nothing to do with the little time. And she came to us at the age of 15, just left school, and to be our help. And she had to take the telephone on occasions of where we had to go up. And so she got married, and there she is,
the church being with Francentina as bridesmaids. I was a doctor, of course, then she got pregnant. I delivered her myself at Halesworth Maternity Hospital. And I say that sort of epitomised my idea of country doctoring, very on the street and nice. Well, there's myself now, doing the doctoring of what represented some doctor 100 years ago, just outside what now is the bookshop. And going on in my top hat, and my little bag, which if you read my book, to get into the spirit of it, I had some very good medicine inside, which I taught myself out with as I was waiting for the start. And I used to go out every ladies I knew and give them a nice hug of grace as I was feeling well in good form. So, there we go. Oh, there's the one. We haven't got Bernard here, I don't think. He said he was coming. He was a managing director of management. He's looking very still. Are you up there? But you can see yourself, young man, yes. And there's various people, David Mitchell, myself somewhere in the middle, and various people at that time. This is 1964, and the first year when we became Sergeant Royalty, which was, I had got 7 years of it till I was 42. Yeah.
You had a sabbatical, didn't you, towards the end of your GP career?
Yeah.
And did you just sort of touch on that?
Well, I think I've got one picture of that. There's the tennis, sorry. I didn't tell you all the things that we got up to really, because there's so much such a wonderful opportunity to live as we do here in Southwell, in the countryside of London. We had every opportunity for all the things I enjoyed doing. There was swimming, of course, and there was sailing, there was shooting, running. We used to make the most of all the countryside, right down to Thorpeness or right up along the coast up to Cove High, and we had great fun, didn't we? And then I organised this tennis tournament, which between four courts, we started off, had our little individual tournaments and ended up with a final, which there is myself and William, we actually won. Well, that's the last time we ever won it, because then Chris Castle came along. And with Mary James, you won it for every year after that. We didn't have a look at it. So that was good fun. Next another thing. I organised a treasure hunt, which your family joined in, as you remember.
I do, yeah.
And we started off at the White Hart, and I put different places you had to find all dotted around the countryside, and the one I would like best of all was Karen. You had to find it with the phrase, as Karen takes you all the sticks, spelled S-T-Y-X, find this man in Waller's Wick. Well, that was the ferryman, of course. And then another thing was a corpse. I made a corpse under a haystack in the middle of Blytheborough, showing this chest with a knife and a bit of ketchup coming out of it, and the legs are kind of sticking out from this scroll in the middle of Blytheborough. And it says, Bob, who's his wife ran the surgery there, young lad happened to go to the haystack, not being told anything about it. Well, he was horrified. He said, it's a corpse, someone's got a knife in it. And Bill Bob said, that's just Dr. Hopkins having his bit of fun. So that was another bit of fun. But who won it? The prize.
We won it because my father was the MP for this area at the time. We knew the area extremely well. We ended up at the Harbour Inn.
So what was your prize? What did you find in the case at the Harbour Inn?
It was just chocolate.
That's fine. I think you're probably going to
Those are the days before breathalyzers as well.
Well, Dan Yates, he got caught speeding through Glyndebourne. I mean, I told everyone had to dress up as pirates. And the officer stopped and said, "What are you doing, sir?" "I'm a pirate," and drove on. So I had lots of fun, yeah. So what else do you ask me?
Well, I think we're coming towards the end of your colourful life, I put it that way, Chris. And maybe we can just hear why you decided to stop being a GP in 1990, and then introduce Tim Morton, who's a GP from Bethel, who's chairman of the local medical committee. We talk about how modern general practice compares with how it was in your day.
Yes, well, as I said, we were supposed to be independent contractors, and I like to get on with my work in the way I thought I knew best, when I was very proud of what I did. And then the first thing, as I said, about 1980 is that we had restriction on what we could smoke, which is fair enough. Then, in the beginning of 1990, they began to put these sort of protocols and edicts from the government on high, how we were to run our practices, and I got resented this. And it was really when they came, we were asked to be told by some, I thought she was just a little girl, and we met at the heads of the Patrick Stead, and she told us in everything what we had to do. Leaflets had to be done this, maps had to be done this. She was just telling us how to run our own practices, and I just got really annoyed by it. And I was within 2 years of retiring anyway, so I just retired in a bit of a huff, and perhaps maybe too much of a thing of it. I wrote to our MP, and I'll just see something about that in a minute. Oh, that's, I think it's rather sweet. All people you know, Wheelers and Holmeses and John on the left, anyway, there they all are. There's only about 2 people still alive now, that's John and we've John Holmes and Jim Wheeler, all rounds and all round. So that's my hospital which I was in when I went to India, where I was there for 3 months, which was a good experience, I think. They taught me more than I taught them. I was supposed to be an expert in general practice, as the dear Dr. Venkateswamy who asked me to go there, because they just set up this hospital. It was a new idea, and they thought GP from Southwark from England would help them, which I did my best to do what I could, but they really knew what they were doing. They just didn't have enough money for medicines and things to test with and so on. There we are. That's what I had from another MP, Alan Porter. And when I wrote to him, that's what he wrote. I probably can't read it, but he said, I'm sorry that you're resigning, and you did complain to me before. I must have written to him before, saying something about what I was bold about. And but I'll do my best to try and talk about it in the House of Parliament. But nothing happened. But that was my resignation, part of my resignation. And what else have we got? Oh, that's the grandchildren, just to show you. The next generation, actually. So we ought to show them, I think. So, well, that's really what happened to me at the end. Maybe I exaggerated everything a bit. But it's just because I was brought up to feel that we were independent people who could get on with not being told by Whitehall and down in London what we had to do. So I'm sure lots of things have improved in many ways, but I did say that the morale of the doctors would go down, in GPs, and I was sorry for them. And, well, I think it has happened, hasn't it? We can't get them anyway, so in a way, or what there must be perhaps a lot of reasons, but they're actually turning out more doctors now than in my time. And yet you can't get anyone to fill posts, so they're up full time. Would you like to use this one? Yeah. I want to like it.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? It's interesting, isn't it, how life changes. And, I remember, Christopher, because in 1984, I was a young GP trainee with Nigel Train at Southport, at Grantham in Kensington. And he said one morning, you're doing the surgery down at Southport. Dr. Hopkins is going on holiday. So my first recollections is actually the morning surgery, the visits, the afternoon surgery. And listening to you, I was reflecting on how different John and myself sort of our daily workload is. I think the biggest, you were talking about what the biggest change in medicine over the last 30, 40 years. I would actually say it's not anything to do with actually the medicine. It's probably computerization. It's the fact that we want an immediate response. My practice gets 700 calls on a Monday. OK Records is 4 times the size of Southport. That's an enormous number of patient demands. When I started as a partner of Records in 1990, if you sent off a pathology request, you'd wait several days for it to come back. If you were expecting a hospital letter from a consultant colleague, you'd expect it in a week, 2 weeks, possibly a month. So life was very much slower. Nowadays, access to general practice is instant, by telephone, online consulting, pathology results come back overnight or within hours, letters are emailed, so they come back virtually overnight. So the pace of change is so much more. And the access to it is much greater. I was interested reading your book, Christopher, about when you started on North Parade, no receptionist, people turned up for morning surgery, you fitted in your visits, the evening surgery. It is a lovely halcyon image that unfortunately doesn't resonate with my daily workload, which starts at 7:30 in the morning and finishes close to 7 o'clock in the evening, and it's a very full-on day. But I don't have my wife, fortunately, doing the reception work. I have a huge staff of receptionists, administrators, paramedics, pharmacists, social prescribers, nurse practitioners, a huge supporting staff these days to manage that huge demand. So I would say actually the biggest change for medicine in the last 30 years is actually computerization.
Can I just ask one question on that? I thought when you posed that question to yourself, you were going to say the number of women that were coming into medicine. Because back in 1970,
Hardly any. None when I first came to medical school, the Royal Free had women, but none of the other hospitals. No.
whereas now I think 60% of all medical students are women.
I'd be very careful to take it. I'm going to get myself into trouble.
Yes, I think it's a good thing.
Absolutely. I remember I trained at the Westminster in London, and only 10% of my year were female. Now 60% of general practice is female for very good reasons. But I wouldn't say that's the problem with workload now. I think that the newer generation of doctors coming through want what we call a portfolio career. So they're not actually working part-time, they're working full-time It's just that the proportion that they're doing in general practice, the rest of their time is being filled up with other medical work. One of the biggest workloads that young doctors are taking on is actually the medical education of the next generation. So we've had the medical school at UEA for a number of years now. To teach the students coming through requires an enormous increase in medical manpower. So my practice is a training practice, so I have several of my colleagues who are working several sessions a week training up the next generation. So when we say that young doctors are only working part-time, actually part-time in general practice is actually full-time for most occupations. But in fact they are actually doing other things, hospital posts, medical education. I for myself am heavily involved in medical politics. So I don't see any of the newer generation slacking by any means. They're just doing medicine in a different way.
So shall we open up to the floor? Anyone would like to, John, did you want to comment on this?
Yeah, sorry. I'm John Hammond, I'm a GP from Saxon London, and I've been there for 35 years, so slightly longer than Tim. But I must say, when I heard Chris, we haven't met before, but I heard a bit about second removed. That is me, because I struggled to get into medical school. I got a B, a D, and an E at A-levels, which was not enough, so I got turned down, and I took the D and E again. Exactly the same. It's a bad moment. Eventually I got in, and I went to the Royal Free, which was a girly one, so we were half and half. But those were days, and it was really good. But I take the point, I think those sometimes who struggle to get in maybe do want to do it a bit more. And nowadays we do have a lot of people with great A-levels, and wonderfully who do it for a bit, don't like it, it's a bit hard, not very nice. And I think we are making fundamental mistakes in medical school selection, and we're not maybe choosing people that are in it for the longer term. So I think I'd echo what Tim says. 35 years, I used to go home for lunch in the old days and do many more visits, and relatively it was a breeze. Now it's 7:30, 8, we're there till 7 or 8, and it's intense. You're having your lunch while you're doing results, EPS, prescriptions, all these other things we have to do. And I think it's really hard to understand when they talk about all these lazy GPs. It's just not true. I'm the only partner in Saxon London now because the 4 doctors younger than me have all left because they don't like it anymore. And so they were able to get out. And I think it's really sad that people and the complaints have gone up and up. And we had a great backstage success as it happens. We were the most vaccinated COVID practice in the whole of England. And in my 35 years, I was so pleased we signed that contract. Although all my friends said, don't do that because you'll be doing it every weekend till the summer. They've got you once you do that. Well, I'm very pleased we did because the patients really loved it. So, the people really respected the fact that we were really going the extra mile to do it. And yeah, I work every day of the week and we work 3 weekends out of 4 at the moment doing all the boosters. And I've got 2 hours off to come here. I mean, it is really intense, and people do need to understand what they're saying about those damn lazy GPs and what a life, all part-time, not doing anything. Just not true, just not true. And it's good that there are people here who can maybe spread the message that it isn't so easy, and that's why no one wants to do it. 120 people applied for my job. I don't know for such a long time because no one is applying. And I had 2 partners who then became salaried because no one wants to do all the administration, all the work that goes with it, all the responsibility. I employ 55 people. I'll be bankrupt if the practice goes down. It's a lot of onerous responsibility people don't really follow. So being a partner it's not surprising that young ones don't want to do it. Why would you? We used to earn quite a bit more than the salaried ones do, and now we don't. So what's in it? So I'm pleased to come up just to hopefully give some insights, like as Tim has done, as to what the job is like now. It's changed immensely, but we can do so much more. I mean, I think of the day when we used to go out to all the crashes, like Chris was saying, we'd have our little green light on the top, and we'd do the best we could before the ambulance came, because the ambulance men were just stretcher bearers. Well, now they're paramedics, they're really skilled, and they're the people you want if you go down, because they're doing this all the time. You know, the heart resuscitation, the car crashes, they're real experts. And they're also having a hard time because it takes hours to get an ambulance. It's not their fault, it's just they're queuing so long in casualty. So, you know, big hand, the ambulance service do a fantastic job, which you must remember. So, yeah, I can't do anything else, but I do want you to understand, that's why I've come, just so people understand that it's not the breeze, and, you know, I have got someone who's coming now, but they won't be partners, no one will be a partner anymore, what's in it? So, when I give up, I don't know what happens.
I'm a retired female GP. I'm an ex-partner of Tim in the medical sense. I started training in 1975 as a female at Bart's Medical School. I was taken apart. I think 15% of us who were female were spoken to by the senior medical registrar and told that we were training in the position that men could have been in. We were not entering a Lucy Clayton modelling agency looking for a husband. We were expected to do our work and work a full time when we were employed, because we had taken a man's place in the training scheme. I was told in 1975 that my training would cost the state, I think, £750,000 if you work out all the student costs, the running the hospital, and what Tim was mentioning, the enormous amount of work you have to put into producing the next set of doctors. Doctors it's sort of 10 years perhaps before you go into general practice. There's an awful lot you used to have to know before you could Google it all. And so the government has never recognised what £750,000 was in 1975 must be an enormous amount. This government runs everything on business lines, and they have always dodged out on training enough doctors. They've imported them all the time. The NHS has an enormous proportion of foreign-trained doctors. We're now moaning about not having any doctors, sufficient numbers. Like when I started at Beccles, I was one of 105 applicants. And I think this is one of the underlying things. The government may moan about not having waiting times for GPs, but they have not invested in producing doctors because of the horrific cost of it. They've been pinching doctors from elsewhere.
Okay.
So I think I can speak from back here. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
So I think there's actually a broader problem in government, and it's how it treats the people who serve the public, whether they're police or doctors or prosecutors or teachers. And our public services, we have such unrealistically high expectations of them, which are cultivated by the government, but they can only be as good as the people in those services. And people who enter the public service, they do it because they want to take care of people. They're caring people. And I always get very upset with the government when I see it knocking them. Whether it's doctors being accused of not working hard enough, or teachers. And I just think the government has to rethink its whole approach to how it treats the people who work in government.
Thank you. I hesitate to say this in front of Lord Prior, but it might be that the relationship between NHS England and the GP body at large is not at its most relaxed right now. Tim, I know you're active within the BMA, and this is a question for you, if I may. The BMA indicative ballot sets out a number of actions that could be taken by GPs. And the BMA tells us that
a number of these potential actions would result in a breach of contract. And my question for you is now really the time for GPs to be even contemplating such action, especially when you compare their work with your colleagues in secondary care, in accident and emergency and intensive care units, for example, where they have little option but to simply accommodate things as they are and do the very best they can. Thank you.
I think that's a really good question. I've just finished a 2-year stint on the GP committee of the BMA. Fortunately, I wasn't part of that vote. I disagree with it personally for a number of reasons. Primarily because I think it's the wrong time. The country is still going through a pandemic. It's confused, but it represents the frustration of general practice with NHS England, with the government, with certain parts of the media, denigrating the work that we're doing. You have to remember that general practice has provided 75% of all the COVID vaccination in this country. All you see is the mass vaccination centres on the media. Without general practice, we'd have been in a sorry state with vaccination service. So where do we go from here? I know a lot of my GP colleagues are very unhappy with the way that the ballot has gone. But it is a reflection of the frustration that we are faced, and that we need some proper leadership from government with primary care. Because primary care deals with 90% of all the NHS contacts. Secondary care deals with a much smaller amount. And I think general practice has always been viewed as the awkward squad in NHS terms, because we are technically independent contractors, whereas my hospital colleagues are employed. We have a contract with the NHS, and I think it goes back to what Christopher was saying about 1990, is that we are independent advocates of your health and well-being, and we do stand up and ask the awkward questions of politicians. And that doesn't play well with certain politicians and certain bureaucrats, etc. I have a fear that what we're moving towards is very much a salaried service, and that will be the detriment to patient care, because as a partner, the buck stops with you, and you do get that extra mile. As a salaried doctor, you clock on, you clock off. And I think we are in danger of having a worse service. One of my colleagues actually summed up general practice really well recently. He said it can go from the best job in the world to the worst job in the world in a second. Which actually just gives you an idea of our daily workload. We can have something fantastically go well, and then the next consultation is devastating. As a GP, we're clinicians, but we're also basically senior risk managers. We spend our day weighing up risk and probabilities, because if you send everyone to hospital or order an ambulance for everyone, you can overwhelm the system. So I think for the future of the NHS, really we have to invest in primary care and general practice. We're not alone. You look across the world, and certainly across Europe, everyone is in the same position. The French, the Spanish, Germans are all facing very, very similar issues. The workforce of the future, yes, we've got more people training than ever before, but it will take quite a significant amount of time. We don't really want to be pinching from other countries, because there's huge ethical issues about sort of
not supporting their own systems.
So I could be on frowns here.
I think just a couple of quick points on that. It's always difficult balancing the hospital and primary care. There are a couple of salient facts here. With, I did write a white paper. With the hospital service, the workload, if you're in orthopaedics and the workload gets busy, we need to do more hips and business case and then employ another orthopaedic surgeon. When I worked at the hospital at Ipswich 35 years ago, there were 4 orthopaedic surgeons. Well, I looked a couple of weeks ago, now there are 28. So in general practice, we've got less GPs, but the hospitals have exploded, and quite right too. They can do much more. It's great, it's what we want, it's what we need. But we also need something in primary care, and the number of GPs have gone down while the numbers in the hospital have just exploded. And that isn't widely perceived. And the other thing with partnerships, we've had more partnerships collapse in the last year, and when they look across the country at what's happened, when they've collapsed, they've been handed on to other companies, to CCGs, or to Federations, or to Virgin, or whatever. They found on average, the cost of running that partnership as it was is now 3 times as much, and the CQC score, the quality rating, has gone down. So partners do something that's really valuable. They get paid a little premium, but what stunning value it is.
I don't know how I'm going to phrase this question, because obviously shortage of resource is obviously a problem. But one question is, why don't in general GP services open on a Saturday and a Sunday, when generally most services in this country, whether it's a shop, is now a 7-day-week environment, which is an evolution. But if I want to see a GP today, I can't in Saxon, Framingham, Southwold. Why aren't surgeries open 7 days a week?
Because back to the fact we're independent contractors,
Yeah.
The contract we have with NHS England is for 8 to 6:30 Monday to Friday.
We're fine. So it's a government.
So David might want to answer how he's going to fund that expansion of that
And
service.
by the way, I'm not being critical of the NHS.
Yeah,
I love the NHS.
So if you wanted a 7-day service, that contract would have to be changed, and NHS England would have to pay a lot more. They'd have to find a lot more GPs to service that contract.
Which I realise because you've got no resources.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting
But
that, if you're open 7 days a week, you're just spreading, you're going to have the same amount of people. If I've got a problem on Friday night, then if I come to you Saturday, Sunday, or wait till Monday, it's not going to, you're going to spread. It's just interesting that generally everyone in London as well.
I agree, it makes sense. And it goes back to one of my original comments about the pace of change of demand and expectation, that you want your result immediately. And in fact, that's not possible. A lot of what happens over the weekend doesn't need immediate treatment, because there are A&Es, there are 111 service, there's out of the hour service. But if you are going to expand to a 7-day service, you're going to have to fund it not only with finance, but with a workload to support it as well.
And Tesco's wouldn't do it with one member of staff, either. You need lots of people on the deck that need to be able to offer round-the-clock service. You can't just do it with no one there.
We're going to wrap up in 5 minutes. I have one last question, and then we're going to wrap up. No, it's the lady there. Yeah.
I think that the gentleman over there, that your question illustrates the problem, which is, I would like to have medical care just like that anytime I work. But we haven't got enough GPs.
Yeah.
We haven't got enough resources to do that. So we've got to look at our own expectations. And one of the big problems I have with this, a patient should have a right to be able to see the GP face to face if the patient decides that they want to do that, is it's just a distortion of the system. One of the problems that GPs have to struggle with is the worried well. The worried well are demanding a lot of time. But if you have a system of triaging where the worried well call up and speak to a nurse or have a Zoom call or whatever, and actually you don't need to see a GP, that's an effective use of resource. But if you let the patient, the worried well patient, say, no, I want to have the resource when I feel like that, that means that that person is depriving others who really need it of the GP resource. So that's my problem with this latest government initiative, which I think is just, I don't know, what is it? It's like bread to the, cakes for the people, distract them, give them something, but it's not going to work, and it's just going to make the system worse for everybody else and demoralize GPs.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to give Chris Richard for a last word. We'd like to have one in a minute. I know the mayor would just like to say something right at the end, I think. Just to add to what Tim and John were saying, the fundamental problem, I think, is that only 10% of the NHS budget goes into primary care. Most of our budget goes into secondary and tertiary care. We spend far too much, relatively, on right at the end of life, on very complex conditions. And we have to reallocate that budget more towards primary care, but it does mean it coming away from other areas, because money is not infinite. It means that we've got to rely upon GPs and primary care more generally to provide a lot more prevention health service rather than a sickness service. I actually personally think that the partnership model, the small partnership model, is broken, but we can discuss that another time, John, at another occasion. Would you, Chris, like to have a last word, or then leave it where it is?
Well, all I'd like to say is gratitude to people like Jessica and others who resurrected the old hospital rather like Phoenix from the ashes and kept it going in another way. That was a great shame as far as I'm concerned. Well, I'm not practicing it, but it doesn't matter that so much, but the old hospital came to an end. But anyway, it's keeping going in another way, and I'm glad that I've been able to sort of help it just in a small way by all you good people who come today to contribute to it, as you came just to listen to what I had to say, and others had to join in at the end. So thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming again. Thank you, Christopher. It's been a really humorous look at your life as well as the seriousness of it all. I'd like to thank the doctors here because I didn't know what was really happening, the difference between primary and secondary care and things like this. So I think that you've spurred a really good debate, I think, and something that should be forwarded. I think all of us should be given a bit more thought about what's happening to the beginning of life and not, as Jessica said, the end of life. So first of all, I'd like to thank you, Christopher, Lord David, thank you for your contributions. I would just like to say a word or two about the reason we're all here, in a sense, with South Gen, with the new hospital, as Christopher spoke about here. It's been an ongoing project now, 4 or 5 years since we first declared it as an asset of community value. I would urge everyone, before you leave Southhold, walk past there and see what's happened there. It's how can I put it? It's the future. Instead of losing something, we've gained something new. So I'd like to thank you all for coming and donating towards this project. So thank you again. Thank you again.
Thank you.